the conversation that we're going to have is really, really important on the sexual Holocaust that's taking place, not just in America, but really around the world. And we're looking forward to speaking to a couple experts on that to discuss this topic. Today, I want to talk about the sexual Holocaust, the destruction of America, and what's actually taking place, because it concerns you, it concerns me, and it concerns those around us, as we'll get into tonight why. Hey, real quick, a shout out as a thank you to all of our Creation members. Some of you are joining me tonight. I appreciate that. Creation members are people that just pay a monthly fee of whatever they want, and they are part of our Creation membership program, which I still need a better name for. I got to come up with a really cool name. I don't have that yet, so I'm working on that, okay? But thanks to our Creation members. It really helps set Creation Today up with a foundation for those that are giving whatever they want each month to have access to these webinars, all the ones we've done in the past, and anything we'll do in the future. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that. That helps our ministry out tremendously, and it's a big blessing. I want you to know that there is a chat feature to this. If you hover over the screen, or if you're on a phone, if you tap on your phone, you'll see a little dot, a couple different things come up. There's a Q&A where you can ask us questions. There's a chat feature that you can use, and I want you to know you can communicate with just myself and Jeremy and Amanda, who's going to be handling the chat. You can chat with just us, which is called the panelists, or you can chat with the panelists and the attendees. When you click that selection, anybody can read your chat. So keep that in mind. If you have something private for us, you may want to send it through the Q&A question feature, and we can use that. It really is great to have you guys here. Good to see some friends. So Deborah, great to see you here on here again. To the Stallman family, thank you guys. I look forward to hanging out with you guys one day. I feel like we've done enough of these that we need to meet in person and have a good time. Scott and John and Jeff and Christopher and Sam, thank you guys for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And to all of those of you that are here, I don't have time to read all the names, but thank you guys for being on here and being with us. We really, really appreciate that. Put the, a second, I can't stay. Oh, Josh, you're going to really enjoy the conversation. Okay, so if you got to catch the replay, that's cool, but you're going to really, really enjoy today's session. Hey, I want to welcome Jeremy and Tiana. I got to meet Jeremy through a radio program. It was kind of interesting. I did a radio program years ago, and I was simply, I was invited onto this radio program, and they wanted to talk about Noah's Ark. So I simply shared the knowledge that I had about Noah's Ark. And I didn't know they were going to have another guest on the program at the same time. This other guy's on there, and let me tell you, he is going to town. He's like, I've been to Mount Ararat, I've been to this site, I've been to this site, I've done all this stuff. And I was just going, this guy's incredible. I called the radio station and said, you got to get me in touch with this other guest of yours. It was really cool what he had to say. And so they put me in touch with Jeremy Wiles, and I got to call him and get to know him a little bit. Was fascinated with his love for really researching a subject and getting to know everything he can about it so that he can present the truth. He is married to an amazing young lady, Tiana Wiles, and together they launched what many men have already gone through. It's called the Conquer series. And I can't tell you how many men have come up to me at churches, in airports. I had a guy at a restaurant when I was up near Green Bay, Wisconsin a couple months ago now. I'm up there and he's like, I recognize you. And I get that occasionally, but he's like, hey, were you in the Conquer series? And I thought, wow, that's powerful. So over 1 million men have gone through this resource that Jeremy and his wife, Tiana, have really, this is their baby that they've birthed to the world to try to help. And over 1 million men have been helped by this. It's really incredible. Jeremy and Tiana, thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having us, man.
I seriously, I'm blown away by the work that you've done. It's something that I think my wife and I dream of being that couple right there. Dream of being where, man, we're in it. We're editing, we're in the writing process, we're doing it, like we're really making things happen. I know that's both a good and a bad thing, but man, you guys have survived, it's happened. And you guys have produced not only this, but many other resources to help people. What is it that made this be a conversation that you wanted to have with the world?
That's a good question. So it actually started back in 2012 with the Conquer series.
Yes.
And so we were in church one Sunday morning, and the pastor stated the statistics of pornography use in the church. And I was like, wow, man, this is a huge deal. This is a pandemic. That's the real pandemic right now.
Yeah.
Not COVID. It's pornography.
Mhm.
It reaches every continent in the world. And we knew at that moment, hey, this is a big deal. We've got to do something about it. And so we had a conversation on the way home, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And we went at it. That was it.
That,
Just like him, taking his backpack and going on his trip to Mount Ara. It's like, okay, here I go. That's kind of like the same thing we did here.
God says go, you just start going.
Yeah, we saw a need, and we realized the need is the call. We don't need some kind of sign from God to do something like this. There's so many men, women, and children drowning and dying from this.
Yeah.
Marriages are dying. Children's futures are dying. The identity of an entire nation is dying because of this. Yes, we've got to do this.
Well, that kind of sets up why this is such an important topic, no matter where we're at. It's a very sober topic that a lot of people want to ignore. A lot of this happens behind closed doors, and kind of the church wants to say, let's just leave that behind closed doors and just pretend it's not happening, or just not deal with it. How has the Conquer series and the work that you've done helped bring this up in a way that is something that's palatable, something that can be talked about?
Oh my gosh.
Well, that hasn't been easy because it's a taboo subject in the church.
Mhm.
And so the problem is 56% of pastors are also struggling with pornography.
Yeah.
And so if it's that big of an issue in the church,
Mhm.
then this is a hard. So we tried to get to the pastors to get the Conquer series in the church to start talking about sexual integrity, right? And it was like knocking on a steel door. There's no one answering that thing, and so we started going to the men who are struggling, saying, hey, we've got something here. It's a whole revelation on looking at pornography in terms of from a biblical worldview and how pornography affects the brain. And once we started to reach men with this message of healing, and they started to get free, they started taking it to the church. And so they would go to their pastor, and their pastor would say, oh yeah, well, we don't have that issue in our church. There's no men here struggling with pornography. I teach biblical values from the pulpit. I preach right out of the word. Certainly no men are struggling with that stuff in my church.
And then they saw their groups, right?
And so these men were persistent. Like, hey, no, this is an issue, man. You got to talk about this stuff. And so after so many times where, I'd get these phone calls from men saying, my pastor doesn't want to talk about this in our church. And I'm trying. I'm like, hey man, don't give up. Just keep going back to him. Don't give up. And eventually the pastor would say, okay, you know what? You can bring the Conquer series to the church. You're going to have to be in the basement, at the far end of the basement.
Yeah. Leprosy.
On Thursday night at 3 a.m. and you can do it. Yeah. And they're like, got it, thanks. They go for it. And that's how it grew.
And that's what's amazing to me is these are men going, we've been looking for these kind of tools. And those of you that are watching, sorry, this is just, you got to understand, men have been, and women now have been dying to have something that's different than, well, just try harder and we'll pray for you and good luck with that. That's kind of been the way it was dropped off and left in the church world. So, well, I guess I want the people that are on the webinar and they're going to watch this later, I want them to understand your background, what made this important to you, and then what is going on. I mean, for those that might be ignorant of, okay, here's the real stats. I did a Facebook Live earlier and I was just holding this up. I'm like, guys, we're at a 70% failure rate. And it's actually, isn't it higher than this? This was my safe number.
Yeah.
Isn't it the average number of men, the percentage of men that look at porn on a weekly basis, it's pretty high, isn't it?
Yeah, that's 70% addicted. And then you still have especially after, we don't know what's happened since coronavirus has hit this
Yes.
country.
Exactly.
I mean, you've got lockdowns, men in their homes, they're out of work.
Mhm.
The addiction rate is going to go through the roof the next year. So it's getting worse
Yeah.
and worse every day.
And the reason why is because of the pain levels.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that a lot of people in the church do not understand. Addiction does not exist in a vacuum. It's simply because there's pain. And men in society have learned to, and women as well, have learned to medicate pain through different kinds of addictions, whereas food addiction, pornography addiction, addictions. We are a very addicted society. We are constantly trying to avoid pain, to numb it. And it also applies to the church, to Christians, unfortunately.
Well, that's something that okay, let's get into this because it's something that I really appreciated about the Conquer series and about what you did. And you've actually got this now on a really cool platform. I want you to tell people about that. But the beauty of what you did is you said, look, it's not about just trying harder. We're going to give you the actual tools for success. We're going to teach you about the cycles that you're going to go through, just understanding that this is a medication. I am trying to medicate. I'm trying to fix something that is hurting. I'm trying to solve a problem. Just that help me mentally. And I'll be honest with our viewers. I put a video together. It's on my website of the fact that I was exposed to pornography in 5th grade in the bathroom at a Christian school. And was totally clueless, got exposed. That led to an addiction that I thought, well, once I'm 14, this will go away. You know, this is something you mature out of. And once you're 16, maybe 16 came around, I'm like, well, it ain't gone. Maybe 18 is when this goes away. And then I know marriage is what's going to take care of that. And nothing fixes that problem. If you don't conquer, you're just going to be addicted. You're going to be a slave to sin, and it's going to continue to bring about death. And let me tell you, I can tell you firsthand, it brings about that death to the family, that death to the marriage, that death to intimacy, that death to the relationship with God. It brings about death. And so we really are in a battle and we're conquering. So can you go into that a little bit? Feel free to share more statistics and more about why the approach you guys have taken is so unique and a little bit different.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the differences is that we combine both the Bible and science. And science really corroborates scripture, if you look at it. We took a lot of the shame out of this, which is one thing that, a lot of the pioneers in this area, Christian pioneers such as Dr. Doug Wiles, he was trying to do this for so long, and when we made this very cinematic, it was so relatable to people. We speak very visual and we just speak the language of movies today in our culture, so it was really easy to relate to people. And at the same time, we gave them revelation because now we were taking people down to the science of why they were addicted. It wasn't because they were not good or that they didn't love God. It was a brain problem. And when we can show them where the problem is, it's like diagnosing a disease in the body. Go to a doctor, you need help. It really took the shame off of things. And that's what made this very easy and accessible. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Eric, when I was in church and I heard the pastor read those statistics, that hit home for me too, because this was a secret struggle that I had in my own life. And so I was looking for the opportunity to figure out, how do I solve this problem? I just want to get this thing checked off my list and I'm going to go about my life, just do the check 1, 2, 3 and I'm done and don't have the porn problem anymore. Well, most men have this problem and they keep trying harder to just not do that behavior. And it puts them back into a cycle of shame and acting out, then goes back to shame and they act out. And they don't realize that at the root of it, what starts off as a moral problem quickly becomes a brain problem. And, when I remember the scripture in Corinthians, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. Well, what does that mean? You sin against your own body.
Yeah.
Well, you're sinning against your brain. So it's changing the neurochemistry of your brain. And, the brain is like an internal pharmacy. It's open 24 hours a day, and you can access that pharmacy and take chemicals off the shelf to make you feel good if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what pornography does. It gives you access to those chemicals like dopamine in a huge dose that makes you feel good for a brief moment, followed by increasing guilt, condemnation, and shame. And so it sets you up that now you need more feel-good medicine from your pharmacy, which is more dopamine to make you feel good. Oh, now you got more shame. So you're back into this horrible cycle. And so the Conquer series was seeking to show men this cycle, but also help them find freedom through a biblical process. And we took 2 years to put this thing together to teach men, hey, this isn't about, check a few things off the list. This is a long-term process, and it's going to take a lot of work over several years for you to finally get free.
Yeah. And also, I think because what we did was we created a movement without realizing it. We just thought, oh, here's a medicine. But because the medicine was so effective, it created a movement. And now we're seeing men moving from the Conquer series to our new series called Warpath. And it's these guys who have found freedom from pornography, but now they're going back to the areas that they've destroyed, their marriages, relationship with their children, the loss of dreams, their ministry. They're going back in those areas that was sabotaged by their sexual addiction. And now they're like warring against that and rebuilding those places that were destroyed. It's so
that's powerful. The thing that this doesn't, most men think that this is my little thing. I do this on the side. Makes me feel good in life. It's none of your business, right? I still love you, towards his wife. But it affects not just you and your brain, it affects your wife, your children, your job, your performance, your finances. Mm-hmm. Everything in your life is affected. And men choose to live in a lie thinking that it's only about them. I mean, it's one of the biggest lies that you could ever buy. It's insane.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I think that's just a microcosm of this problem, of this cancer. If you just look at the family, the structure and what this sin is doing to the family is absolutely devastating. Now, if you could just, if you had a camera and you had a wide shot of what's really going on, you can see the big picture. The microcosm of this is that, or from a macro view, it's like, oh my gosh, it is destroying society. The very foundation of society is changing. The identity of people's changing, and the depraved mind that Paul talks about in Romans 1 is what we're seeing today. It's just such an apathy. This is what this does to you. It dehumanizes you. It distorts the image of God in man and women.
I think that is one of the things that we today feel like, oh, this is kind of because of the internet, because of, the ability to access things on something and keep it. Therefore, it's a lot different today. But the reality is, Joshua threw it in the comments, we're not dealing with anything new. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with things that men and women have dealt with for thousands of years. We live in a sin-cursed world. And I was on during the Facebook Live this morning just talking about what we were going to talk about tonight. I had one guy say, why are you trying to make sex a taboo subject? And I'm like, I'm not.
It's not.
It's not. But I am trying to say it's not as cheap as the world says it is.
Yeah,
it's something holy and sacred, and it's something beautiful that should be exalted rather than something you go dig around in the trash can for. It is something beautiful. So, as you've talked to men, to pastors, and this has turned into an entire movement all on its own, how has that played into it? People thinking, hey, this is turning it from something cheap into something beautiful.
It's been a challenge, to be honest with you. God created sex for a purpose. And it's so that we can be united and join together and procreate. And Satan has turned something very good into something that's distorted. And, if you go back and you look at societies in the past, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, others, they've collapsed because of sexual immorality. And here we are today as a nation, and we're going to go and vote tomorrow. Tomorrow's the election day. We actually have already voted, but most people are going to vote tomorrow. And we don't have a political problem. We have a moral problem.
Wow.
We have a cultural problem.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And we're not going to solve our issues in this nation through a political solution. And it's not to say that you shouldn't go vote. That's a very important thing,
Absolutely.
especially as a Christian. But we're not going to solve our nation's problems by casting a vote. It's just not going to happen. You can't solve this problem through a political solution. And, until we deal with this type of wickedness in our churches, really, not even in the nation, it has to start in the church. We're in trouble. And I'm worried for the future of the nation with the rampant availability of pornography. We are now the greatest exporter of pornography in the world. We used to export the gospel, and now we export pornography.
Yeah.
And less than 10% of churches have a ministry to deal with sexual integrity.
Yeah.
And then I don't care if it's the Conquer series or not, just pick one. Talk about sexual integrity in your church. And less than 10% of the churches in the country are dealing with this issue.
I know. It's
crazy.
crazy. It's really crazy.
It is.
Think
It
of
really
this. You think that the church right now is already struggling. A lot of churches are not equipped to handle the problem that exists today with pornography. But with COVID, a lot of experts are saying the impact that this has, the mental health that's issues that are going to come out of this is just going to be crazy. So it's kind of like they're saying in the years to come, you're going to see a myriad of serious mental disorders, social disorders because of this. Pornography is going to be one of those things, but it's going to be way worse than that. It's really scary because you'll see more and more deviant sexual acting out activities going on right there, behaviors also within the church. There's so many stories that are just blowing our minds, like, oh my gosh, is this really happening in the church?
It's really not about sex. It's really not about alcohol or drugs. It's about how you handle life. You're using these things to medicate the stress and pain in your life. And typically people have found a way to do that at a young age. And once they get that pattern in life that, hey, I can use this as a drug to medicate this thing in my life, whatever I'm dealing with, it could be stress at work, it could be marital issues, financial issues. Oh, I go to pornography for that. That makes me feel good. And most time, they haven't even connected the dots. They don't know that they're accessing pornography to make themselves feel good in that moment. They just know, that's what I do.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I go to that,
Yeah.
They're blind to it.
Yeah.
And
I've often thought of pornography. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying they're in total bondage to pornography. They have no idea why they're doing it.
I've often thought of pornography as the tip of the iceberg of what's really going on. And Tiana, you hit on that. The other sexually deviant behavior that stems from this and the fallout of this, the repercussions of this are huge. The ripple effects are a tsunami. We're looking at the number of children recently that have been rescued from child sex trafficking right here in America, in Georgia, here in Florida, in Ohio, a big rescue just happened. Another one, I think, up north somewhere. And I'm looking at these rescues and I'm going, what is hid from sight, from culture, is the fact that in America, this is the norm now. There's lots and lots of this happening. And so we're trying to fix, we're trying to stem the tidal wave, but we've got to get to the epicenter of where this is happening. It's happening in individual lives.
Exactly. And if we don't do that, again, I mentioned about deviant behavior. There was a time, and I'm sure I can be bold to speak this. There's a time when homosexuality was not normal. It was a mental disorder. There was a time in American culture when we perceive homosexuality as a mental disorder clinically. So, and now it's kind of like, oh, and you're born that way. Hello, when we were interviewing Judith Wiesman, Dr. Judith Wiesman, about the Kinsey reports, she was amazing. She told us as we were interviewing her that pedophilia, legalizing pedophilia, was on the table. This is the next agenda that they're going to push. So if we do not fight this, I mean, we think
it's coming down the road.
It's coming down there. Okay, you're a little child. You cannot protect your child from pedophiles because even in the UNCRC, sorry, one of their paragraphs or whatever, is that they're basically allowing pedophilia. I can't remember the wording, but it's basically saying if this becomes a supranational law, it means that pedophilia is going to be legalized, and you as a parent cannot protect your child.
Wow. Okay, so we got the election happening. We've watched Donald Trump, quote, try to drain the swamp of a lot of things. I've often wondered, and here, this is just, we'll edit this out if this is a stupid idea a year from now, okay? But I've often wondered if he knows these players. He knew the Epsteins and what was going on, and he not that he could do anything at the time, but I think now, I just saw 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, they just put another $100 and some million towards fighting this if more things are going to be exposed. And I do believe that there is a group of people that want to do exactly what you're saying. They want to make this where it's the norm. Where you now at 8 years old are allowed to transgender, to be a different gender if you so choose, and your parents aren't allowed to say anything about you have to be allowed to. This is mind-blowing what they're being allowed to do and what they're trying to push through.
Go back 20 years, man. Just 10, 15, 20 years ago, these conversations didn't exist. 20 years ago, we would never hear about transgendering 10-year-olds. We'd be like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
It's come so fast, so quick. And look at the statistics of violent crime is higher than it's ever been. Sexual assault is higher than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. The pornography industry has larger revenues than ABC, NBC, and CBS combined. This thing's massive. We're talking about a beast. It's like American society is just oblivious to it. It blows my mind. It's like this is the elephant in the room in the nation, and no one really talks about it. And it's because we have a nation of addicts now.
Yeah.
The nation is addicted. We are over-medicated. We're wound up and so many things in life that if you take pornography away, you're going to see a bunch of 10-year-olds kicking and screaming on the floor.
Yeah.
Wow.
In many ways, we've become very two-dimensional as human beings. It's like, again, when it comes to the pain factor, we're not used to suffering. We're not used to pain. We don't know how to just embrace the cross and say, Jesus, help me through the suffering. Let me really understand. Let me understand the cross. Let me understand the gift of suffering. When you grasp that, when you understand that, you have a better way, a more mature way of dealing with pain rather than going to your addiction, your idol, okay? Because your addiction is really your idol. And the opposite of that is being in worship, in the oneness with Jesus. So as Christians, we really should have the upper hand in this battle, but yet a lot of Christians do not have the roadmap to their healing. And that's what we provided in the Conquer series and in all our other series. We're trying to give people roadmaps towards healing, towards freedom, so that it's sustainable. They can stay in there, and it's sanctification.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I want you guys to each take a minute, and then after this, I want you to tell me about this, the new series that you're working on, about you got that new website, Soul Refiner, which you can become a member of. But before that, if you could look and just talk to every man, Jeremy, in America, what would you want to communicate to him? And then Tiana, if you could talk to every woman in America, what is it that you would want to communicate to them as after everything you've been through, after all the testimonies you've heard, after all the writing and directing and research, and I mean, you've talked to lots and lots of experts on the subjects. What is the one thing you would want to communicate with everything you know about this Holocaust taking place in America, about waking them up, or about speaking into their life?
Wow,
Maybe
a
that's too
great
big of a
question.
question to ask right now.
No, that's a great question. I would tell for men out there who are struggling, I would ask them, what are you waiting for? Because you probably didn't start struggling in 2020. You probably didn't start struggling in the past 5 years, 10 years. You've probably been doing this since you were a teenager. And how many times have you tried to just stop? I'm not going to go back to that. That was the last time. God, please forgive me. I feel so horrible. I'm not going back there. But you do. You do it over and over and over again. And it's because your brain has changed. Like neurologically, it has areas of deactivation in your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system. If you got a brain scan, it's not going to look like a healthy brain. But in Romans, Paul tells us that your brain can be renewed. That's a good thing, but it takes time and effort and some processes, and you got to follow some accountability rules in there. And so I would ask, what are you medicating? If you're going to pornography, you're medicating something, and you're using this as your little idol in life to feel good, but it's not getting you anywhere, man. You're going to have to let this stuff go. You're going to have to pull up your big boy pants and deal with these things in life and say, if I go another year based on history, I'm still going to be addicted. So I have got to find something that helps me in this area, because it's kind of like doing brain surgery on yourself. It's not going to do that. And you need surgery in a figurative way. You've got to get some help. And so you've got to find wisdom and knowledge outside of yourself to get better. And it's more than just, well, I'm just going to start reading my Bible more today and I'll figure this out on my own. You need to follow the Bible when it tells you, which is iron sharpens iron. Confess your faults and sins one to another. Lean on other men in this battle. And do it there's bigger reasons to do this than yourself too. Do it for your wife and your family, your kids. Do it for their children. Break that curse in your family. So, and there's so many men out in this world today that are struggling with this, and so few men willing to pick up the sword and say, I'm going to get in this fight and I'm going to deal with it. I don't want to be 75 years old. And there are those men. I lead groups, and I've had some men in their 70s in these groups. Like, man, I don't want to be 70 years old struggling with pornography.
Yeah.
So if you don't deal with it head on, you're going to be 60, you're going to be 70, you're going to be 80 years old. I guarantee you. Dealing with addiction.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To view this and many more conversations in their entirety, we invite you to partner with us at creationtoday.org/partner.